So now to start to create the embellishments for the front of my card, I'm going to use a piece of the Subtle designer paper from Stampin' Up, and this is in the Bashful Blue color, and this is the polka dot pattern. You're going to need a Versamark pad as well as the Nice Ice embossing glitter that you used to emboss the inside of your card. I'm just going to take and pat the long edges. This piece of designer paper measures 2.5 by 5.5, and I'm just going to pat the 5.5 inch sides of my designer paper into the pad, inking up or adding the adhesive along the outer edges of my designer paper. I'm going to use my coffee filter again, and I'm just going to sprinkle embossing powder along the edge of my designer paper, tapping off the excess embossing powder or embossing glitter. You can see that gives me this beautiful line along the outer edge of my designer paper, and I'm doing this instead of matting it onto a second color. I didn't want to add that color to my card, so I'm just adding on that nice finished look to my designer paper. So I'm going to heat that and then repeat that on the remaining 5.5 inch side. So once you have embossed the two 5.5 inch sides, I'm just going to clean up my glitter, and I will be using this again in a moment, but I just want to make sure that I don't have any spillage of my glitter while I'm working on something else. So now I'm going to embellish the front of this card, and I'm going to use two pieces of ribbon, and I'm going to mat them on top of one another. So first I have here the Bashful Blue double-stitched grosgrain ribbon from Stampin' Up, and I'm going to lay that across the middle of my designer paper, and this piece of ribbon is a 7-inch piece. So I'm just going to lay that across the center, flip my designer paper over, and stick the ends of my ribbon down with some double-sided adhesive. A little bit too tight. You can always flatten that out so that your cardstock or your designer paper doesn't bow. So once you have your first ribbon down, just going to fix this one more time here, making sure that it's straight and stuck down. So now that you have your first piece of ribbon stuck down to your designer paper, you're then going to need a piece of Stampin' Up's white satin ribbon, and I'm going to now center that in the middle of my grosgrain ribbon in between the stitching. Flip this over and stick this down to the back with some double-sided adhesive. And when you're working with this, it is good to also stick this down and then cover your ends with a piece of Scotch tape. And the reason I'm doing this is because I have matted two ribbons on top of one another, and I don't want my card to fall apart. So just cover those ends with a piece of Scotch tape. So now that you have that in place, you can set aside your tape, and you're going to need a small piece of white baker's twine. And I've just used like a 4-inch piece. I'm going to slide this under my white satin ribbon towards the left-hand side, and I'm just going to tie this into a double knot on the satin ribbon. And then you can trim off the tails on the baker's twine, and you'll be able to still position this if it's not in the right location just by sliding that on your ribbon. So now I'm going to take and stick this to my card front using my double-sided adhesive. So you can bring your card base back in. I'm just going to clean off my workstation, and then I'm going to stick my ribbon designer paper piece to my card base. So like I said, I'm going to take and stick this to my card base using some double-sided adhesive. And I'm being very liberal, if you're noticing, because I have double layer of ribbon. I want to make sure there's enough adhesive to completely stick this to my card. So I'm just going to leave equal borders on the top and bottom of my designer paper here. So that's about 3/8 of an inch down from the top fold line. So once you have that in place, we're going to take a scrap piece of white cardstock. You can set aside your card base for a moment. And I've gone ahead and I've already die cut my label from my scrap piece of white cardstock. And I used Papertrey's Matte Stack number 2 because it coordinated with my stamp set, which is also called Matte Stack number 2 Collection. So I've used this stamp, which is this beautiful flourish, which will embellish the front of my die cut label. So what you're going to need is your Versamark ink and your embossing glitter, as well as your filter. We're going to ink up and stamp our label here, our swirly label, onto our die cut label cardstock piece. So just ink that up, center that onto your cardstock, and then stamp that down. So once you have stamped your label, you're going to remove that, set aside your stamp as well as your Versamark for a moment. I'm going to lay this in my coffee filter and sprinkle my embossing glitter over top of my image. I'm just going to tap off my excess embossing glitter. Then I'm going to heat this with my heat tool. Before that, I want to make sure that I clean up so I don't spill any of my embossing glitter. And then I'm just going to set the embossing glitter onto my die cut label with my heat tool. So now that you have heated your embossing powder in order to embellish the front of your die cut tag, we are ready to now add the next step. So you're going to set this aside and you're going to stamp your greeting, and I'm going to use a scrap piece of Bashful Blue cardstock, the baby greeting that's found in the same stamp set. I'm going to stamp it in Versamark, and I'm going to use some Primary Ebony regular embossing powder. And I'm going to, again, use my coffee filter so I don't have any wastage. So just ink up your greeting, stamp it onto your scrap piece of cardstock, sprinkle that with your embossing powder. I'm just going to clean up the excess there. Set this aside, and then you're just going to heat the greeting so that the embossing powder is melted, setting that in place. So now that you have embossed or heated the embossing powder that's on your greeting, you're going to need a circle punch. And I found that the 1 1/8 inch circle punch from EK Success matted perfectly into my label. So I'm just going to center my greeting in the window of my circle, punch that out. You can set aside your scrap as well as your punch. You're going to need your Versamark, your coffee filter, and your nice ice blue embossing glitter again, and we're going to roll the circle here along your Versamark pad, inking up the edges so that you can add the glitter just like you did to your designer paper. So just ink that up. Then I'm just going to lie that down into my coffee filter. I'm going to sprinkle embossing powder around it. You could also roll this in a pile of embossing powder if you needed to. So just tap off any excess embossing powder, brush it off if it's out of place a little bit, and then you're going to heat that with the heat tool as well. So I'm just going to clean up my work area, and then I'm going to heat this to set the embossing glitter around the outside of my circle. So once you have your circle greeting embossed along the outside, you're going to take and you're going to stick that to the center of your label using a Stampin' Dimensional. So I'm just going to stick that down, making sure that it's nice and straight in the label. I'm also going to place a half-back pearl on either side of my label there. And here I'm just using some smaller ones and place that in the outer flourish on my label. And once you have that complete, you can set aside your pearls. You're going to bring your base back in, and you're going to stick your label down to the center of your card here, also using some Stampin' Dimensionals. And again, I would place my dimensionals on the top and bottom as well as my outer edge of my label, just because I want to make sure that this doesn't just stick to the ribbon, it also will stick to the designer paper on the card and adhere properly. So once you have it evenly spaced, you're going to stick that down. Now we're going to add our last embellishment, which is to add a bow. So I have a 12-inch piece of the white satin ribbon that I used on the card. I'm going to take this and tie this into a knot, or into a bow. And in order to make a pretty bow that lays straight, I always make two loops, crisscross them, and tie that into a bow. I don't start with a knot, and then I just pull my tails so that I can adjust the loops until I have the right size, and then you can trim off the tails of your bow with your ribbon scissors so that they are the right size for your project. Once you have that, you're going to stick this over top of this knot of your baker's twine using some mini glue dots. So I'm going to place a couple mini glue dots on the back of the knot of my bow. And then I'm just going to slide the baker's twine a little closer to the label there. I'm going to stick this down directly over top of that baker's twine. And there you have your finished baby card. It's embellished beautifully with WOW's Nice Ice Blue embossing glitter, and it's just a beautiful tone-on-tone, easy to create baby card. I hope you enjoyed stamping with me. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, at the end of the week, 2 lucky winners will receive an amazing WOW embossing powder prize pack. One winner will be chosen from all the comments left on the Paper Crafters Library blog throughout WOW Embossing Powder Week, and one winner will be chosen from all the comments left on the WOW Embossing Powder blog throughout the week. Winners will be announced on Friday, May 25th, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. To enter to win, visit the Paper Crafters Library blog and leave a comment in the post you see here. If you're watching this video from somewhere other than our blog, you'll find a direct link to this post in the video description section. While you're there, I invite you to check out the benefits of becoming a Paper Crafters Library member by clicking on the Benefits of Membership link at the top of our blog. The winner will be announced on Friday, May 25th at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Be sure to visit our blog every day this week for more great projects using WOW embossing powders and for more opportunities to win, as each day you leave a comment counts as one entry. See you on the blog!